Welcome back. Today we're going to be covering rational number operations, day number 3. Our content objective is students will be able to find the product and quotient of rational numbers. Language objective is students will be able to state fraction problems and answers correctly. Why am I learning this? Well, it's important for many real-life problems like calculating how many calories are in part of a serving of food. So background knowledge, please remember we used to do this with multiplication, that in this case it means 3 groups of 3/4. So here I'm showing you, here's one group of 3/4, 2 groups of 3/4, 3 groups of 3/4, and that leaves us with our answer of 2 1/4. Mathematically, what you would do is write 3 as a fraction by putting it over 1, multiplying it out straight across, leaving you with 9/4. Which does reduce to 2 1/4. So either way you see it, we get the same exact answer. So in this case, this means 2/3 of a group of 6. So in this case, if it's 6, I'm just going to take 2/3 of it. Here's 1/3, here's 2/3. So both of these will give me 4. And again, you're just going to make 6 into a fraction and multiply straight across, and that's going to give you your answer. Now what does this mean? Well, it means 1/2 of a group of 1/3. So here, if this is 1/3, it's 1 out of 3 rectangles. I'm going to just take half of it, and half of that would only make it 1/6. Okay, so here on a number line, you can see that this is a third, and if you only take half of a third, you only get 1/6. Because here you can see it's split into 1, 2. I'm looking at the space here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and only one of it is shaded, so therefore it is 1/6. But again, mathematically, you're simply going to multiply the fraction straight across, and that's going to give you your answer. Notice, when we're multiplying fractions, you don't need a common denominator. The reason why we needed a common denominator when we're adding or subtracting is because whenever we add or subtract, we can only combine things that are alike. So the units needed to be the same, which is why we need common denominators. But with multiplication or division, we don't need common units, which is why we don't find the lowest common denominator to do it. So here, 27 divided by 9 is 3 because 27 is 3 times 9. Okay, so 27 is 3 groups of 9, or you could think of it as 27 is 9 groups of 3. Okay, that's basically using the commutative property. Numbers are allowed to change around the operation. What number is being repeated 5 times to give you 20? The answer would be 4. Okay, so 12 divided by 3. So basically you're thinking of 12 is 3 groups of what number? Hopefully your answer is 4. 4, 4, and 4 gives you 12. So you could think of it as, in a sense, repeated subtraction. I'm subtracting 3 from 12 every single time until I can get to 0. So notice here, with 12, I subtracted 4 once, leaving me with 8, subtracted 4 one more time, leaving me with 4, and subtracting one last time to give me to 0. Because a multiplication is repeated addition, division then makes sense that it would be repeated subtraction. 4 is 2/3 of a group of what number? So what number could I take 2/3 of to give me 4? So here, if we're looking at 4, 2/3 of it would be like such. Okay, so we need an extra third because this is already 1/3, this is 1/3. Now this is only 2/3. So where's the other third coming from? Well, I'm going to take an additional 2/3 right here. So I'm going to move over another 2/3, which is going to give me 6. So the answer is 6, but mathematically, how could we show that? We simply turn 4 into a fraction, which is going to be 4 over 1, is how I like to see it. And we multiply by the reciprocal, which is 3 over 2. Multiply straight across, and you would get 12 over 2, which just so happens to be 6. So no matter which way you do it, of course, you're going to get the same answer. So 2/3 is 4 groups of what number? So here on a number line, I first want to find where 2/3 is. Here's 1/3, here's 2/3. So just looking at 2/3, what would each be worth if I split them into 4 even groups? What it would look like this. Okay, so now I need to figure out, okay, which one, how much is this worth then if I did split it in half? Well, if I'm splitting 3 in half, this would be a 1/6. Okay. So what is the answer? The answer is going to be 1/6. But mathematically, how would you do this? 2/3 divided by 4 is the same as 2/3 times 1/4. Again, it's the reciprocal of the whole number because first of all, 4 over 1 would be the fraction. Take the reciprocal of that would be 1/4. And then multiply straight across and you'd end up with 1/6. So background knowledge, okay? Before, when we are multiplying fractions, we just multiply straight across and then we check if we can reduce. In a problem like this, hopefully you recognize that the lowest common multiple is 15, leaving you with 3/4. Now, why is that an issue? Well, some of you may not see that the lowest common multiple is 15. So that would be an issue because your answer would not be reduced. So what should you do instead? What you should be doing is cross-reducing. Okay, basically that's when you're reducing before you multiply. So if you look at this, what you want to do is look at the numbers across from each other, like 5 and 10. Do 5 and 10 have anything in common? The answer is yes, they both have a 5 in common that we can reduce by. So 5 divided by 5 gives 1, 10 divided by 5 now turns into a 2. Now, looking at the other set of two numbers across from each other, 6 and 9. Do 6 and 9 have anything in common? The answer is yes, they have a 3 in common. 6 divided by 3 becomes a 2. 9 divided by 3 becomes a 3. Now all you have to do is multiply straight across. 1 times 3 is 3, and 2 times 2 is 4. Now this is a much better way of doing multiplying fractions because you're reducing before you multiply, which allows you to get a reduced answer most of the time. Now, is there a chance you're going to have to reduce later sometimes? Absolutely. But it's best that you reduce first, then wait towards the end. So now let's go ahead and practice. So for number 1, what I want to do first is look at the numbers across from each other. So let me go ahead and circle it so you can see which numbers I'm looking at. 3 and 27, do they have anything in common? The answer is yes, they both have a 3 in common that I can reduce by. So 3 divided by 3 becomes a 1. 27 divided by 3 becomes a 9. Now I'm going to repeat the process with the other two numbers, so 8 and 16. Do 8 and 16 have anything in common? Yes, they have an 8 in common. So 8 divided by 8 becomes 1. 16 divided by 8 becomes 2. So now I'm left with 1 times 2, which is 2. 1 times 9, which is 9. So my final answer is 2/9. So I'm going to say I concluded that the product is 2/9. Now let's take a look at number 2. So number 2 is a little bit more advanced because we have to remember a few things. Number 1, if we have a whole number, we need to first turn it into a fraction by simply putting it over 1. And the second part is if we have a mixed number, we need to remember to turn it into an improper fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this as -2 over 1 times 3 times 6 is 18 plus 1 is 19. So we have 19 over 6. Now before I multiply, it's going to be a very good idea to decide right now, is my answer going to be negative or positive? If I'm multiplying a negative times a positive, my answer is definitely going to be negative. Now after this part, I'm going to check to see if I can cross-reduce. Do 1 and 19 have anything in common? The answer is no. Do 2 and 6 have something in common? The answer is yes, they both have a 2 in common. So 2 divided by 2 becomes a 1. 6 divided by 2 becomes a 3. Notice I didn't care so much about the sign because I already took care of it here. So now I'm just going to multiply straight across. 1 times 19 is 19. 1 times 3 is 3. So far my answer is negative 19 over 3. But I can't leave it like that. I need to turn it into a mixed number. So doing some side work right here, I'm going to go ahead and put my answer is going to be negative. Don't want to lose that. 19 divided by 3. 3 can't go into 1, but it can't go into 19. Let's see, 6 times, which is 18, with a remainder of 1. So my answer is going to be 6 and 1/3. We already noted that it was going to be negative, so my answer is negative 6 and 1/3. Now you've practiced multiplying fractions before, but this is the first time you're incorporating positives and negative signs. So for me, I personally like to decide right away if my answer is going to be negative or positive. That way I don't accidentally get caught up in doing some side work that I forget about the sign of the product or the quotient depending on the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and try one more problem with you, and then you can go ahead and try one by yourself. So for number 3, again, what I like to do is decide right now. Is my answer going to be negative or positive? Well, it looks like we're multiplying a negative times a negative, so my answer is definitely going to be a positive. Note that I am putting a plus sign to let myself know that I took care of the sign. However, please make sure that you understand you don't need to put this plus sign on your homework. In fact, I prefer you not to. So first we're going to check if we can cross reduce. So 7 and 21. Do 7 and 21 have something in common? Yes, they both have a 7 in common. 7 divided by 7 gives you 1. 21 divided by 7 gives you 3. Do 8 and 5 have something in common that we can reduce by? The answer is no. So I'm just going to multiply across. 1 times 5 is 5. And 8 times 3 is 24. So my answer would be, I concluded that the product is 5/24. Okay, so now at this stage, I'd like you to pause the video and try number 4 by yourself. Okay, so hopefully for number 4, you decided right away your answer was going to be negative. Okay, now from there, all you have to do is turn your numbers into improper fractions. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. So 7 over 3 times 14 times 1 is 14 plus 1 is 15. So 15 over 14. I'm going to check if I can cross reduce. 3 and 15 both have a 3 in common, so 3 divided by 3 is 1, 15 divided by 3 is 5. 7 and 14 both have a 7 in common, 7 divided by 7 is 1, 14 divided by 7 is 2. So now multiplying straight across, 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 2 is 2. Note here, I already said that my answer was going to be negative, so I'm going to put that up there, but wait. Do you think I can leave my answer like this? The answer is no. You're going to have to turn it into a mixed number. So again, just reminding myself the answer is going to be negative. Don't want to lose sight of that. I'm going to go ahead and do 5 divided by 2 goes in 2 times with a remainder of 1. So it's 2.5. No, I already put my negative, so my answer is negative 2.5. So hopefully you got that one right. So now let's work on dividing fractions or mixed numbers. First, understand multiplication and division are inverse operations of each other. So 4 times 3 is 12, and that's the inverse of that would be 4 divided by 1/3 is 12. 4 divided by 2 is 4, and the inverse of that would be 8 times 1/2 is 4. And 1/2 divided by 3 is 1/6, which is the same thing as saying 1/2 times 1/3 equals 1/6. Now here, usually when you think of taking half of something, you can multiply it by 1/2. And if you're dividing something by 3, you're multiplying by 1/3. So it's the same idea. So hopefully you start to understand that basically what's happening is when you divide, you're essentially multiplying by the reciprocal of the fraction. So right here, let's rewind a second. So if you think of it as 3 over 1, notice it's the same thing. It's the reciprocal of this. So here, division was the reciprocal of the second number. And again, division was the reciprocal of the divisor. So if we take a look at this example here, what we're going to do is first think of it as, okay, so I'm taking 1/2. If I'm dividing by 1/3, that's the same thing as multiplying by 1/3. But to keep things simple, you can just think of it as we're multiplying by the reciprocal of this. So that's going to be 1 over 3, which would give me 1/6. So let's take a look at another example. So again, 4/5 divided by 2/3 is the same thing as 4/5 times the reciprocal. So it's going to be 3 over 2. Now before I multiply, I'm going to check if I can cross reduce, because that's always a good idea to reduce your numbers before multiplying. 5 and 3 don't have any factors in common. 4 and 2, however, do. They have a 2 in common. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a mixed number by dividing. And that's going to leave me with 1 and 1/5 as my final answer. So with that said, let's go ahead and practice a couple problems. Number 5, we have 3/8 divided by 1/2. Again, hopefully you understand that that's the same thing as saying 3/8 times the reciprocal of this, which is basically times 2/1. Now that I've turned it into a multiplication problem, I know exactly what to do. I'm just going to check if I can cross reduce. 3 and 1 don't have any factors other than 1 that I can reduce by. 8 and 2 do have a factor in common I can reduce by, which is 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So here, 3 times 1 is 3, and 4 times 1 is 4. So I'm going to say I concluded that the quotient is 3/4. Let's try one more. So here, what I'm going to do is decide right now, is my answer negative or positive? Well, it's a positive fraction divided by a negative fraction. My answer is going to be negative. So here, this is going to be the same as taking 3/5, but multiplying it by the reciprocal. So that's going to be, I'm just going to consider a positive 7/3, just because I already took care of the sign already here. I'm going to check if I can cross reduce. 3 and 3 have a 3 in common, turning them into 1s. 5 and 7 don't have any factors in common, so I'm just going to be left with 7/5. It's going to be a negative 7/5, but I am going to turn it into a mixed number, so I'm going to do some side work. 7 divided by 5 goes in once with a remainder of 2. So my answer is a negative 1 2/5. Now, if you're doing this on homework, what I would do is decide right now, if it's negative or positive, and go ahead in your answer box, type in my negative. That way, as I'm doing my side work and all of the cross-reducing and things like that, I don't get caught up in the side work and forget about the sign. Just a quick tip. Okay, so now that I've practiced them with you, what I'd like you to do is try 7 and 8 on your own. Okay, so let's see how well we did. Again, if I were you, I would decide right now, is my answer negative or positive? Well, it's a negative divided by a positive, so that's going to be negative. I'm going to turn this into an improper fraction, which is going to be negative 16/9 divided by 2/3. Now, dividing by 2/3 is essentially the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that. So I'm going to go ahead and put negative 16/9 times the reciprocal of this, which is 3/2. I'm going to check if I can cross reduce. 9 and 3 have a 3 in common. So 9 divided by 3 becomes a 3. 3 divided by 3 becomes a 1. Now here, 16 and 2 have a 2 in common. So 16 divided by 2 is an 8. Notice I kind of ignore the sign for now since I already took care of the sign right here. And here, 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that's going to leave me with 8/3. But I need to turn it into a mixed number, so let's do some side work. 8 divided by 3 goes in twice, with a remainder of 2. So we have 2 and 2/3. So notice I already put my negative, so I knew that. So it's going to tack on that. It's negative 2 and 2/3. Number 18. So here, 8/15 divided by 4/5. Hopefully you understand that we're just basically taking 8/15, and instead of thinking of it as dividing it by 4/5, it's essentially the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that. So it's 5/4. I'm going to cross reduce. 8 and 4 have 4 common. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 15 and 5 have a 5 in common. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So 2 times 1 is 2, and 3 times 1 is 3. So here, notice I didn't care too much about the signs because they're both positive, so automatically I know they're positive. So I would say the quotient is 2/3. Okay, so now let's try a couple more problems. Go ahead and try number 9 and 10 by yourself. So I left you some tricky ones, but hopefully you knew what to do. First of all, might be a good idea for you to turn the whole number into a fraction. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and decide right now. A positive divided by a negative is definitely going to be negative. And again, if this was your answer box, I'd put the negative right away. So here, this is going to be 5/1 divided by, turning this into an improper fraction. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. So here, I'm going to show you real quick, if you prefer not to determine the sign right away, if you want to deal with the sign with the problem, I will show you what you would do here. Since this is dividing by -7/2, this is essentially the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of this, which is a -2/7. So I'm going to go ahead and cross reduce, which actually I can't. So I'm going to multiply straight across. 5 times -2 is -10. 1 times 7 is 7. So notice here you can kind of keep track of the negative this way if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a mixed number. A -10 divided by a 7 is going to be a negative. This goes in once with a remainder of 3. So -1 3/7. Now it's totally up to you if you want to determine the sign right away or if you kind of want to work with it throughout the entire problem. Number 10 was the same idea. You want to turn the whole number into a fraction first. I'm going to personally figure out the sign now. Negative divided by positive is a negative. So here this is going to become -10/1 divided by the, not reciprocal, sorry. This turned into an improper fraction, which is going to be 5/2. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and multiply by the reciprocal because dividing by 5/2 is essentially the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. I can check if I can cross reduce. 10 and 5 have a 5 in common. So one more time, I'm going to show you real quick if you do want to keep the sign in the problem. You can say -10 divided by 5 is -2. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So -2 times 2 is -4. 1 times 1 is 1. So this is the same thing as -4. Or you can just say from the get-go, hey, a negative divided by positive is negative, so my answer is -4. So hopefully you got both of those right. Moving on. Now we're going to jump into decimals. So first, let's take a look at recalling how do we do dividing decimals or multiplying decimals correctly. So first what you're going to do is understand the first number is what always goes on the inside of the division bar. Now please understand the first number is always the dividend, which goes inside, and the second number is always the divisor. It has nothing to do with, oh, the larger number is what's the dividend. No, it's always first number is your dividend, second number is your divisor. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a whole number because I want to divide by a whole number. I'm going to turn this into 14 by moving it one place to the right. I'm going to do the same thing here. Please understand essentially what's happening is you're multiplying it by 10 and that's what's increasing this number. And if you multiply this by 10, I had to multiply this by 10, which is increasing the number to 168. Can 14 go into 1? No. Can it go into 16? Yes, I'm going to put a 1 right on top of that 16 and put 16 here with a remainder of 2. Now bringing down this 8. 14 goes into 28 2 times. So notice I'm putting that 2 right on top of the 8. It does go in perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and say the answer is 12. But let's see if I changed up the problem a bit and said, okay, whoops. What if instead I said, okay, what if it was 16 8/10 divided by a -1 4/10? Then I would say, okay, well, my answer definitely has to be a negative because a positive divided by negative is a negative. Well, since we already did the division, I'm just going to say the only difference is now it's a -12 instead of a +12. And I can prove it to you. A -12 times a -1 4/10 would give me a +16 8/10. So let's practice one more problem. Now let's practice multiplication. So let's just deal with straight positive numbers. What you're going to want to do first is line them up. Okay. You don't need to line up the decimals. You just want to kind of imagine pushing the numbers alongside a wall. So here I like to pick the ones with most digits first. But do I really need a 0? No. So let's just put 8.7 times 0.43. Now if you left that extra 0, is it going to be harmful? No. You're just going to have some zeros that are unnecessary. 3 times 7 is 21, carry the 2. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 2 is 26. Put a 0 here. 4 times 7 is 28, carry the 2. Let's just leave that here. This is going to be 32, plus 2 is 34. Add them all together. and I'm going to get this number here, but I need to count to see how many decimal places I need to move it. So it's going to go a total of 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead and move it 3 decimal places. 1, 2, 3. So my answer is 3 and 741 10,000ths. Now if I change this problem to be a negative 8 and 7/10 times a negative 42 300ths, what would my answer be? Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, so it's essentially the same answer. It still would be 3 and 741 10,000ths. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and try first figuring out what this is, and then by doing that, figure out what a negative 5,600 times 9 would be. Okay, so hopefully multiplying these numbers, let's go ahead and just quickly review. I'm going to go ahead and add the 0 just to see. It's not going to affect our answer, but it is kind of pointless. 6 times 9 is 54. 5 times 9 is 45, plus 5 is 50. So I could have just put a 50 here, but now putting it here would just be 0 times 9 is 0, plus 5 is 5. So just to give you an idea, it wasn't necessary. Counting decimal places, there's 2, so moving 2 decimal places. This is 5 and 400ths. Now, a negative times a positive would be a negative. So the only difference here is my answer is going to be a negative 5 and 400ths. Okay, so hopefully you got those ones right. Now let's try division. Go ahead and pause the video and try both of these problems by yourself. Okay, so let's see how well we did. So first, what we're going to do is take the dividend, which is 1 and 4400ths, divide that by 1 and 2/10. I want to divide by a whole number, so I am going to multiply by 10 essentially and move this decimal 1 spot. Can 12 go into 1? No. Can it go into 14? Yes, once. With the remainder of 2, bring down the 4. Can 12 go into 24? Yes, it can go nicely 2 times with a remainder of 0. So my quotient is 1 and 2/10. Now, if it was a negative divided by a negative, what would it be? Well, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so my answer is still 1 and 2/10. Well, guess what? That concludes the lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, until next time, bye.